In this video, I'm going to show you how to change the starter in a Honda Fourtrax. This happens to be a 1990 Fourtrax 300 four-wheel drive, and this should be applicable to about 1988 to about 2000. They're going to be very similar. Here's what the new starter looks like. And I'll put a link in the description below where to get these off Amazon. Alright, so I'll go step by step on how to change the starter. The very first thing you need to do is unhook the negative battery cable to your battery, or remove it completely like I have. Alright, so looking at the left side of the four-wheeler, it would be just above the shifter is the starter right here. Now if you take a look, kind of back in there a little bit, you'll see I've got one bolt loosened so far. That's a 5/16, and there's one just on the other side over there. Right here is your battery cable, and you don't need to unhook that one until you get the starter loose and kind of bring it out here towards you a little bit. At first glance, you might want to try to take this off right away, but you can just leave it on. We'll get the starter out here kind of open and then remove the battery cable. But the first step is to remove those two bolts in the back with a 5/16 socket. And there's what those bolts look like that hold your starter in place. And just a quick tip, to get back in there, I'm using a 1/4" drive ratchet. The 3/8 is just a little too thick and a little too clumsy to get back in there. The space is kind of tight, so I recommend the 1/4" drive. The next thing we need to do is remove these 5 bolts on this outer cover. And you can use a 1/4" drive or a 3/8, whatever you want. And that's 5/16 socket as well. Now before you pull these bolts out, make sure you take a look and see where they came out from, because this one here and this one here are much longer than these 3. And also, just to prevent an accident, there's gears in here and they could fall out. I suggest you raise up the left side of the four-wheeler so it's at a slight angle. So when you pull this cover off, the gears are more likely to stay in. You can also just put a car jack underneath here and jack up this side of the quad maybe 3-4 inches. Now I've got my jack under this side of the quad. It's jacked up about 4 inches off the ground and it's leaned back. So now we can wiggle this cover off and refrain from trying to pry that with a flathead screwdriver. There is a gasket under there that you don't want to damage. Now with the bolts out, this cover should come right off. And what I did, I just tapped on these 2 ears right here a little bit with a hammer, and then I could see this loosening up. And then you're just going to pull out a little bit, and I can see this one gear is hung up a little bit, so I'm going to put my finger on that and make sure it doesn't fall out. And now you can remove the cover. So you can carefully remove this gear. It will pull straight out. If the shaft stays in there, go ahead and pull the shaft out with it. Mine happened to just stick into the case. Go ahead and set this gear aside. So now that that cover's off, you can wiggle this starter around just like that. Push it back far enough to kind of wiggle it out of the way. Just like that. And now you can easily get this nut here off, because this is usually seized up. So now that it's a little bit closer to you, go ahead and remove that one. Before we install this new starter, you notice this O-ring? You're going to want to go ahead and coat this with motor oil. Go ahead and do that, and then we'll reinsert the new starter. Just go ahead and reinsert the new starter, kind of the same way you pulled it out. And then make sure you take both hands, pull it all the way in so it's seated. Now before you put this front cover on, I like to get these back 2 screws, not tightened, but thread them in about halfway. That will prevent the starter from moving around when you put the front cover on. Starter in position, you have the 2 bolts in the back holding it in place. You're going to want to put this gear back on. and you got to line it up with this gear here and the starter gear. You can rotate this one down here fairly easily. Push this in place, and you'll know you have it in place when you have about a 1/2 inch of this shaft sticking out on the front side of this gear. And now you're going to go ahead and carefully install this cover. And it goes on easiest if you just very slowly and kind of wiggle it back and forth as you're pushing inward. Now if you happen to lose track of which bolts go where, these two up here are the same length. This one right here is the shortest screw, and these two here are the two long screws. And when you do go to tighten these bolts up, skip around, kind of like you would with a aluminum car wheel. You don't want to just tighten down one side all the way and work your way around in a circle. You want to skip around, get them kind of firm, then go about a 1/4 turn past hand tight, and then torque them down nice and snug. Now you can go ahead and reinstall that battery cable and go ahead and tighten that down. And then finally tighten down these back two bolts, and you've got this project done. Congratulations on changing your own starter. You just saved yourself a lot of time and money. You didn't have to take it to a dealer, you didn't have to wait a couple weeks for him to do it, and you didn't have to pay probably $200 for him to install it. I'll put a link in the description video. These are running like 40 bucks. Plan on taking about 30 minutes the first time you do one of these. After you've done one, you can easily do these in about 15 minutes. Hope this video was helpful and informative to you, and thanks for watching.